I think we almost reflexively say, I just want them to be happy. There's an inauthenticity to happiness that comes from never having to struggle. You want your kid to have to earn happiness. And when you make excuses for your kid's bad behavior, and when you try to smooth the way in every way, shape, and form for them, you're not giving them the opportunities to use those muscles and to earn authentic happiness.
This is the Book of Life. I'm Heidi Rabinowitz. Mamaleh Knows Best is a funny and smart parenting guide that makes the Jewish wisdom of the ages accessible for any modern parent. It was a pure delight to speak to author Marjorie Ingall about what Jewish mothers do to raise successful, creative, empathetic, independent children. Mamaleh Knows Best is also the May 2017 Book of the Month for the Jewish Women's Archive Virtual Book Club. Visit jwa.org or follow the link at bookoflifepodcast.com to find discussion questions and join the conversation. So let's talk about Mamaleh Knows Best. First of all, what inspired you to write this book?
People had been asking me to do a parenting book for a long time, and I really didn't want to because I'm hesitant to tell people what to do. But I've always been really interested in Jewish history and really interested in research. And suddenly I thought, what if I could do a parenting book that was really simultaneously about exploring a stereotype in Jewish culture and also looking at Jewish history and sort of the roles of women in Jewish history, and my own impassioned cry for people to both chill out about this standardized testing-driven drive to have accomplished children in a way that I don't think is actually accomplished, and also to have people raise menschy, ethical kids, which I think is much more important than any score on a test. So it just seemed like I could do a funny book that tied all those things together, and suddenly I was really psyched to write it.
Cool. So you mentioned the stereotype, and we've all heard the stereotype about Jewish mothers. So where did this stereotype come from? Is there any kernel of truth in it, or how did it come to be?
You know, there's probably a kernel of truth in all stereotypes, but I think the specific Jewish mother stereotype that we all think of as this sort of clinging, narcissistic, whining, clutching, grasping, Yiddish accented freak comes from well, there are two things. One is we have everybody reeling after the Holocaust. If any event in history is going to make people want to hold their children a little more tightly, it's something like that. But you also have, in Hamilton, it's who tells your story is a constant question. And in the Jewish mother stereotype, what we have in the 50s and 60s is American Jewish men getting to tell stories for the first time as Jewish men. So you have comedy that suddenly is very Jewish and male, and you have high culture, you have literary writing that's Jewish and male and very first person, and you have sort of this anti-hero thing going on in our culture. And I think that meant that Jewish men for the first time had a very large stage to work out some of their mommy issues. And this also coincides with Jews moving into the suburbs and de-urbanizifying. And, you know, the Jewish mother was kind of an embarrassment and felt like a relic of an older world. I think it's very telling that when you have Jewish funny women telling stories, they rarely demonize the mother as much as men do.
So, Mamaleh Knows Best, the subtitle is What Jewish Mothers Do to Raise Successful, Creative, Empathetic, Independent Children. So without giving it all away, what do Jewish mothers do, and what makes it distinctive from what non-Jewish mothers do?
Do you remember the Dan Greenberg How to Be a Jewish Mother book? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't think so.
It was, I think, from the early 60s, and my grandmother had it in her bookshelf, and I distinctly remember reading it as a very small kid and thinking it was the funniest thing in the world. It was a humor book, and I actually bought it used from Amazon when I started working on this, and it completely traffics in the Jewish mother stereotype, but it's also extremely funny. So one of his jokes is like an Irish tailor or an Italian baker can also be a Jewish mother, and I think that to a degree that's absolutely true. But I think that there are a number of currents that have run through Jewish history that have had an impact on our child rearing. One is that it has never worked out really well for the Jews when they've trusted authority too much. Mm-hmm. And I think having this gimlet eye towards authority in general has been a good thing for the Jewish people. We can take advantage when culture goes our way and authority and politics go our way, but we also have to be very aware that people can turn on us in a heartbeat and authority can turn on us in a heartbeat. So I think to head off the Tiger Mom question at the pass, the Tiger Mom stereotype is about you respect your teacher, you do well in that classroom, that is your first priority. And I think the historical Jewish mother, when Jewish children were allowed to go to secular schools at all, there's always been this knowledge that school isn't where all the learning happens. The anecdote that I think made me want to write the book was when my mom told me, my mom, who's a professor of education, told me this story about Isidore Isaac Rabi, who was a Nobel Prize winner, who grew up very poor on the Lower East Side, uneducated parents, and his mom would always say to him when he got home from school, "Did you ask a good question today?" And that's more important than what did you learn today. And he said that's what made him a scientist. And to me that felt like this one little anecdote that said everything I kind of wanted to say in this book. But there's also that Jews have always been funny. There are lots of theories about why that is, but I think that humor is a very good child-rearing tool. And literacy has been a huge part of why Jews have been successful in a zillion different cultural environments, in times when the Jews were pretty acculturated and the times when Jews were really isolated and ghettoized. So those are three of the things that appear in the book. There's 10 chapters, so now I gave you three.
Okay. Right. I don't want you to give it all away.
No. Buy the book, people.
Yes, absolutely. Buy the book. So you talk in the book about being a good enough mother rather than a perfect mother. And that seems like a lesson a lot of people need to learn. So how did you learn that?
That's a great question. The first thing that made me go, oh my God, I am the worst mother ever, was my daughter Josie. She was just making trouble and making it harder for me to put Maxine, who was really a baby, down. They're 3 years apart, and so Josie must have been between 3 and 4. And I got in her face, and I just yelled at her while she was lying in bed, and I was like yelling at her like I would yell at a grown-up. And just 2 little tears rolled down her fat little cheeks, and I went, oh my God, I am awful. And I got myself together, and I apologized to her. Kids are resilient. In the morning, she was totally chill. And it was a good lesson for me that we think that every single thing we do has this humongous shining import, and it often doesn't. So the Good Enough Mother was a concept by Donald Winnicott, who was sort of a mid-century psychologist. And his thing was, if you are too quick to respond to your child's cries, if you are too eager to solve all of your kids' discomforts and anxieties, then you don't give a kid the tools to help themselves. So actually being a good enough mother is better than being a perfect mother. And I think that's a really, really important lesson. Women are often super anxious about doing everything for everyone, and you can't. And choosing which battles to fight, which are the most important for your kid's ultimate development as a menschy, kind, good, independent kid, is a really good parenting lesson. And knowing that it's cool that you can't do everything, and in fact it's important that you not do everything, is a really great lesson to go through life with.
I love all the hilarious stories about your kids in the book. Are there any stories that you didn't use that are good enough to share? Or also, alternatively, can you share a favorite with listeners that did make it into the book?
One of the things I sometimes say about writing about your kids is when your kids are really little, they're an extension of you, and they're fair game to write about, because when you're writing about babies and toddlers, it's really writing about yourself. Now that my kids are older, I did a column in Tablet about how the era of me writing regularly about my kids was over. They are old enough to have some expectation of privacy. So now I only write about them with their permission. Josie vetted the book really carefully, and Maxie told me specifically which anecdote I was not allowed to use, which was not in the book, but she was really clear that there was one specific story that she did not want the universe to know about. It was one of those stories that there was no reason to share it unless you were one of those horrible people who just thinks it's hilarious to embarrass your children. So it was never going to be in there. My favorite story, which appeared in the book in a somewhat truncated form, was we were at a fancy party at a fancy suburban house in Wisconsin where my mother-in-law lives. And I was very anxious about Josie, who was 3, behaving well. And there were these boys who were tormenting her in the basement where the kids were supposed to play. She kept coming up and reporting to Jonathan that, she would say, if you keep taking my toys, you can't be my friend. And they would say, we don't want to be your friend. And that did not fit into her tiny little kid cosmology. Of course you want to be somebody's friend. Eventually, I hear this caveman bellow, and we're up in the adult living room part of the party with our little extended pinkies teacup holding, and my toddler is running through the house, bellowing, holding a wiffle ball bat that in front of all of the guests, she nails one of these bullies in the balls. Can I say balls on your podcast? I just did. With the wiffle ball bat. And Jonathan had said to her, sometimes when somebody says something horrible to you, you have to walk away. And she said, I did walk away. And then I came back with a bat. And, I had to talk to her about violence is not how we solve problems. But in my head, I was like, you go, girl. That was one of my favorite stories.
The book obviously grows from your own experiences, but did you also need to do any research?
Oh, my God, I did so much research. If you look in the back, there is a giant suggested reading list. My husband is a researcher, and I would happily just research and maybe not write. Research is the way I also procrastinate rather than writing. So I looked at a ton of sources, a lot of education texts, a lot of Jewish history texts, a lot of Talmud, Tanakh. And anytime anybody told me about an interesting under-heralded woman in Jewish history, I went, oh, is she a mother? And I went and I looked and see if I could find her writing on parenting. So, yeah, it's mostly history. Publishers always are, this is going to be an X meets Y. So people are always like, this is Tiger Mom meets Blessings of a Skin Knee. And Blessings of a Skin Knee is much more Torah-based than this is. I wanted this to have a lot of history in it, stuff from Victorian times and medieval times, and I wanted to focus on not only having Ashkenazi culture, but also having Sephardic stuff represented too.
Is there one key piece of advice that you want listeners to hear now?
I think we almost reflexively say, I just want them to be happy. And we really need to think about how we get them to happy. There's an inauthenticity to happiness that comes from never having to struggle. Many of the people who will be reading this book have pretty comfortable lives, and so much of our energy is on making our kid be comfortable, and that's not good. And you want your kid to have to earn happiness through, oh, look, I accomplished something. Look, I did something hard. The book talks about the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, which are the evil impulse and the good impulse in Jewish tradition. And you want a kid to have the experience of tamping down their evil impulse and saying, look, I can do it. And when you make excuses for your kid's bad behavior and when you try to smooth the way in every way, shape, and form for them, you're not giving them the opportunities to use those muscles and to earn authentic happiness.
All right, excellent. So you mentioned that there's this further reading section at the back of the book. Is there any particular book or books that you would like to call out from that section?
Let me go there.
Okay.
It's a nice opportunity. Hang on. Let's see. Okay, it's out of print, but Jenna Weissman-Joslitz's The Wonders of America, Reinventing Jewish Culture from 1880 to 1950 is so great. I love her. She's a historian, and I think she's a great chatty writer, and everything is sort of infused with feminism, and she's very aware of fashion and women's culture. In terms of other people's advice, it's more aimed at Jewish communal leaders, but Rabbi Jill Jacobs wrote a book called Where Justice Dwells, a hands-on guide to doing social justice in your Jewish community. And I think it's a good book for parents as well as leaders. And I don't think it's a book that only Jews have to read. Tzedakah is a word that is frequently translated as charity, but it really means righteousness. And how to help other people in a way that also, as the kids say today, means staying in your lane, understanding differences and being respectful of other people's differences, and maybe not rushing in as a savior from your place of privilege, but helping other communities and helping your own community. And in terms of books that parents should read to kids, because so much of this book is about the importance of reading to your kids and how to encourage a love of books in your kids, because I think literacy, as I said, has been a huge factor in Jews' success in many different climates over time. So there's this awesome book that I bet you know called Brave Girl, Clara and the Shirtmaker's Strike of 1909, which is, I think, such a wonderful picture book. You know, I'm kind of obsessed with the immigrant stuff, and I love the fact that so many leaders in the labor movement in America were young women. And I think it's just this beautiful looking picture book. I love that it's mixed media. It's got like stitching and it's got little bits of time cards. It's super cool. How's that?
Excellent. And thank you for the plug for reading. I enjoyed that as I was reading the book. I'm like, yes. It warms my librarian heart. So is there anything that I haven't thought to ask you that you would like to talk about?
What would I like to talk about? You know, I feel like being Jewish and being a Jewish parent does not necessarily mean creating a life around a synagogue. With Judaism, with all cultures, there are so many different food, songs, stories, family stories, as well as cultural stories. I think all kids like to know where they come from, and it's a really nice way to make your kid feel connected to something larger than themselves. I want both non-Jewish readers to realize that there's something in this book for them, and for Jewish readers who don't have that same sort of opportunity for community in that way to find other ways of creating Jewish identity in both themselves and their kids. It's such a rich tradition that there's so much in there that you can explore.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you, as always.
You too.
Don't forget, you can still get an autographed copy of Serendipity's Footsteps, the book you heard about on our April 17th, 2017 episode, by becoming a Book of Life patron at patreon.com/Book of Life. Like today's book, our next book will also be featured on the Jewish Women's Archive website. Here is the author with her dedication.
This is Lori Klein, author of Almost a Minion. I'll be joining you soon on the Book of Life podcast. I'd like to dedicate this episode to Mrs. Heller, my Jewish preschool teacher, whose loving instruction some 48 years ago instilled me with a passion for Jewish ritual and how special it feels to be part of it.
If you enjoy the Book of Life podcast, please become a patron at patreon.com/Book of Life. If you do, you'll get an autographed copy of Serendipity's Footsteps by Suzanne Nelson while supplies last. You can also help us out by leaving a review on iTunes or a comment on our blog at bookoflifepodcast.com. You can like our page at facebook.com/bookoflifepodcast or follow us at twitter.com/bookoflifepod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band. Thanks for listening, and happy reading.